So the system that we're seeing is Accutrack. This is the original Accutrack. So now we see the plaster being mixed, vacuum mixed. The device is called the vacuum mixer. And the vacuum is designed to take away from the plaster all air bubbles. The time is like more or less 1.5 to 2 minutes mixing. The problem with this system is that the margins kind of break after a period of time, so you have to make sure that you fix them well. But anyhow, you can fix them well at the end. So this is a system that has been used many times. There in that region you have some clamps that break. So actually what we're doing now, we take the plaster which has been vacuum mixed, and you see we pour the impression. Yeah, the liquid that you see there is a debabulizer. It's kind of an excess of debabulizer. It shouldn't have been so much. So this is kind of a mistake of the technician. It shouldn't have been evident, yeah, this debabulizer. It's a liquid that allows the plaster to properly fill the details of the impression. So now we keep pouring this plaster. The model, the impression is held upon a vibrating table, which helps the plaster go nicely in. And the other part of the plaster, it's the same cast, yeah, it's one cast, one stage. The other part of the plaster is placed into this Accutrack, into this system. You saw a little bit of vibration that caused the plaster to collapse and to nicely fit in. And at the end, it's just we only have to put the impression with the plaster upon this plaster that is now placed in the system, in the Accutrack. The technician is waiting a little bit to have the plaster a little bit more stable, not so liquid. Yeah, so it's nice to not to hurry. Of course, you don't have to go too long, because the plaster will set. So now the two are placed one over the other, and that's it. That easy. You have the model. And of course, the technician now is removing the plaster while it is not set yet, in order to ease his work afterwards. You can imagine when the plaster would have set, it will be much more difficult to remove it. Now, this is another system. This system is called the Baumann system. That's how it is known. And here we see the details about how the material has to be poured in. That you have a certain amount of a certain ratio between water and powder in the case of plaster, in order to control the dilations, the modifications of the plaster after setting. This is the debabulizer, as I told you, that has been sprayed in the impression. And now the technician will start vacuum mixing the plaster. You see, the plaster is placed in this recipient, and then some water. Of course, normally you should measure how much water you pour in, as we mentioned. Technicians don't have the patience. Most of the times they don't have the patience to do that. So after they do this, they see the plaster is a little bit too sticky and hard, and so they add a little bit more water. It is kind of a mistake, it's true, but most of technicians do this. They add some water. You see, the plaster seems to be too hard to work with, so they add a little bit more water, to make it more workable, so to say. And then the mixing, this is another type of vacuum mixer. That it is, the setting is an electronic set. And you see the vacuum going all the way. And once the vacuum is attained, the mixing starts. Everything is electronically controlled. And of course, the same idea. We pour it in the impression, and we pour it in the base of the model, right? The system has pins, metal pins, as we saw and we shall see again, that allows the exact positioning of the dies once you have them removed, so that you can replace them in the very exact position. Now, the technician is pouring the plaster, of course, 4th grade plaster, into the impression. The plaster has to flow nicely without creating bubbles. When it creates bubbles, is wrong. Either you vibrate it too much. You see there's a vibrating table underneath there. You see in the back, it shouldn't have happened like this. So in this case, the best thing is to stop the vibration. You only need vibration when the plaster gets into the details. Once you're out of the details, you can just simply put the plaster there without any vibration. You see the table is not vibrating now anymore. And this is the correct way to do it. So this plaster is poured into the impression. It's filled, and then nicely and smoothly we fill the system for removable dies. You see there's a margin there that prevents the plaster from running out. And now the technician can stop the vibration, add a little bit more plaster to make sure that there is enough plaster, and then, of course, put the impression upon this plaster that is placed in the model system, and again, that's it. But now the technician sees that he needs more plaster in order to ensure a perfect contact, and yes, that's how we do it. And of course, in this phase, the technician, as we have seen before as well, the technician removes the excess of plaster to avoid working too much when the plaster has set. Now the problem is how you remove it, because you see the pins, the metal pins, they are 0 degrees. So it's going to be very hard to remove it, but we'll see soon after how the plaster is removed from the metal pins. So now the impression is removed from the model. This is a very delicate moment, because if you I mean, you risk to break the dies, especially if they are very thin and narrow. The technician has to pay very much attention during this phase. But here it's just one abutment, yes, in the mouth, and one die on the model, so there's no problem. It's kind of big enough, so it didn't break, it came out nicely. And now the problem is, how do you separate the plaster from the system? all right? So first thing is to remove that margin, the elastic margin that has been there in order to contain the plaster. And now you see this is the magnetic attachment that allows you to separate the model from the articulator easily. And here you see the press. So that's how they do it. You see there's a press and a screw, and you just press it and the plaster goes out. Yeah. There's no other way to remove it. Once you have removed this, then if you place it back and remove it again, you don't need the screw again. But for the first removal, you need to do that. Then you put the plate back. That was the plate that helped you to push the plaster out. This is again the magnetic assembly that facilitates the connection with the articulator, as we'll see later. And now this plaster is being trimmed because obviously you don't need those excesses, and besides it hinders you. Yeah, it doesn't help at all. On the contrary, it hinders the technician in his work. So this is cut. You see that there's a vacuum here that removes the dust. Yeah, the technician doesn't like to inhale dust, obviously, so there's the need to work, you see, under a vacuum, so that the vacuum removes the dust away. And now the technician is cutting the abutment, actually the die, yeah, the plaster die. He has to be very careful not to damage the neighboring teeth or the margin of the tooth of the die. And now the technician starts ditching. That's what we call it, ditching. He starts ditching. That means removing the gum, the plaster representing the gum, from around the margin of the preparation in order to make the margin of the preparation evident. You see, this is the disadvantage in this type of models. Whilst the Geller models, they keep the gum, yeah, and the die comes out from within the gum. In this case, we have to cut, actually to ditch the gum around. And this is not very easy. It's kind of tricky because you can touch the margin of the preparation. Normally, this should be done under magnification. And the right magnification for this should be around 8 times. Yeah. If you're lucky, your technician will use 3 times. But that's another story. Some technicians do use microscopes, yes. 8 times magnification, and that's much better. But again, at the end, you have lost the profile of the gingiva. Yeah. So if you want to have it, you have to pour another model in the same impression, and then when you do your work, to work on this model and then to check on the other model where the abutments are not cut. And it's not very easy, but well, this is how things are done if you have just the plaster model, if you don't have a digital, a virtual model.